I wonder what you think of first if I say the word recorder. A myriad infants in a primary school band playing nursery rhyme arrangements, or maybe the child next door practicing, or even the instrument which you gave up at the age of 10 in order to go on to a proper instrument. Certainly the modern revival of interest in the recorder has turned it very much into an instrument of basic musical education. And that's something which would have really surprised professional musicians of 400 or 500 years ago. They regarded it as a fully professional instrument, with a part to play in music making of all kinds, in church, chamber, theatre, and so on. Mind you, even in those days, not everyone approved of the recorder. In his famous Book of Martyrs, Fox commended a man for falling on his knees and praying whenever his next-door neighbour started to practice. So, if you agree, you better start praying now. That was the sound of a typical recorder consort of Elizabethan times. 2 descants, a treble, a tenor, and a bass. The word consort means a fellowship, partnership, or company. And during the Renaissance, most instruments existed in a company or consort of several different sizes. Now, this was basically because instrument makers took their inspiration from the human voice, with its different pitches of soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Here's what Silvestro Ganassi says in the first recorder tutor ever published, the Fontigara, issued in Venice in 1535. Be it known that all musical instruments, in comparison to the human voice, are inferior to it. For this reason, we should endeavour to learn from it and imitate it. Just as a painter imitates natural effects by using various colours, an instrument can imitate the expression of the human voice by varying the pressure of the breath and shading the tone. Thus, one may truly say that with this instrument, only the form of the human body is absent, just as in a fine picture, only the breath is lacking. One of the most famous descriptions of playing the recorder comes in Hamlet, in that scene in Act 3. Hamlet takes a recorder from one of the troupe of players and offers it to Guildenstern with the words, "Will you play upon this pipe?" When Guildenstern protests that he cannot, Hamlet goes on, "Govern these ventages with your fingers and thumb. Give it breath with your mouth, and it will discourse most eloquent music. Look you, these are the stops." Hamlet picks up the recorder in order to make a fool out of Guildenstern, because the instrument is so simple. Yet that very simplicity is deceptive. Being easy to blow but hard to play is what makes the recorder so unsatisfactory in some ways in schools. But it's certainly easy to make, and recorders and whistle instruments in various forms are amongst the most common folk instruments still found all over the world. the time of the troubadours, and a type of instrument which is as old as the hills. This one comes from the Andes of South America, and it's just like the sort of thing which the medieval minstrels and jugglers used to play as part of their professional routine. It's a typical recorder prototype, the sort of thing we used to call a penny whistle, though inflation seems to have made that description rather obsolete. Whistle instruments go back thousands and thousands of years, just about as far back as Homo sapiens himself. The earliest surviving example comes from the Upper Paleolithic era and is made out of bone. Wood and bamboo were more common materials, of course, but then they do tend to disintegrate rather more easily. Quite a long time ago, double pipes became almost as common as single ones. Relatives of the single and double pipes of the Middle Ages are still to be found all over the world and show the great proliferation of medieval whistle types. Many countries still have their own personal variations on the same basic theme. Here are some modern folk instruments from Norway, Sweden, Hungary, Romania, two from Yugoslavia, a set of double pipes from Bolivia, from Brazil, China, Persia, and two from Turkey. I especially like the highly decorated one. In England, we've preserved the tradition of one particular type of medieval pipe, played as a one-man band with a drum. And in later times, it became a standard instrument for the comedians. One famous Elizabethan player was Richard Tarleton, one of the most accomplished and popular comedians of the time. Another was William Kemp, who played some of the early comic parts in Shakespeare. He created a sensation by dancing a Morris dance all the way from London to Norwich, and subsequently wrote a book about it called Kemp's 9 Days' Wonder. Here's a popular dance tune from the 18th century called Piper's Fancy. Playing the pipe and tabor, like Morris dancing, is one of the old English traditions which has survived. Morris dance teams up and down the country have their own regular player of what is usually known in folk dance terminology as the whittle and dub. But what about the recorder proper? When did it start and where did it come from? Well, the name recorder first crops up in the reign of Richard II. It probably derives from the Latin word for a keepsake. Its distinguishing features are a total of 8 holes, 7 in the front for the fingers and 1 at the back for the thumb. The recorder probably first came to light in northern Italy. So here's a brilliant piece of 14th century Italian dance music, just the sort of thing which the earliest recorders would have played. Throughout its history, one of the most confusing things about the recorder has been its name. During the Middle Ages, an enormous number of names were bandied about, like flageol, flageolet, frestel, flestella, estiva, muse, and of course flute and pipe. Writers and musicians were clearly not too worried about being consistent, though it does make it difficult for us to sort out exactly what was what. Clearly, besides a variety of whistle types, there were quite a variety of flutes too. There were the panpipes or syrinx, associated with the Greek god Pan. Even in classical times, the panpipes were comparatively unimportant as a serious musical instrument. They were played by herdsmen and shepherds. They do seem to have enjoyed a vogue, however, during troubadour times, when their limited compass was suited to simple melodies. But in Greek times, and ever since, panpipes were basically rustic instruments, and it's as folk instruments that they survive today, in a primitive form in Africa, in many different shapes and sizes in South American countries such as Ecuador and Peru, and in Europe as well, ranging from these Portuguese instruments carved out of solid wood and used by street vendors, to the highly developed panpipes of Romania and Hungary, where the pipes are arranged in a curve in order to make fast passages easier to play. The rise of the transverse flute seems to more or less correspond with the decline of the panpipes as a serious instrument. The sound on both is produced in the same way, by blowing across the edge of a round mouth hole, just as you do on a milk bottle. The flute is really a rationalization of the panpipe principle. Instead of having to have a whole series of tubes, one for each note, you make do with a single tube, with a round mouth hole at the side and a whole series of finger holes. Flutes became established in Europe by the 12th century, and they seem to become something of a German speciality. The expression German flute is found on and off for the next 800 years as a means of distinguishing the transverse flute from the whistle type. Now, the Germans developed two quite distinct uses for the flute. It was evidently a popular instrument with the minnesingers, the German equivalent of the troubadours, and the flute is often depicted alongside other courtly instruments. From the 13th century onwards, the flute also became associated with the drum as a military band instrument. By the 16th century, the flute had developed into a family just like every other self-respecting instrument. Here's a consort of soprano, alto, tenor and bass flutes playing a chanson issued by the Parisian publisher Pierre Attenant in 1530. He marks some pieces as being especially suitable for recorder consort, and others, including this one, for flute consort. The recorder family developed during the Renaissance too. One branch of the family was made out of chamois horn and is usually known by the German name Gemshorn. Because of the natural shape of the animal horn, the bore is a tapering one, unlike the cylindrical flute and recorder. As a result, the tone is quite different, rather sweet and watery, something like a soft ocarina. And there were some developments in the recorder family proper, too. Renaissance makers produced the tiniest woodwind instrument ever made, the gar klein flirtlein, literally the very little flute. And recorders were made in increasingly larger sizes too, not only tenor and bass, but quart bass, and most impressive of all, great bass. These larger sizes of recorders make up what's known as the great consort, recorders which play at normal 8-foot pitch, not an octave higher than most instruments, like the typical recorder consort you heard at the beginning of the programme. The sound of the great consort is soft and intimate, because the volume of the largest recorders is very limited. As with most Renaissance instruments, not much was specifically written for the recorder. Composers generally left it to performers to make up their own arrangements. Anthony Holborn, for instance, recommends his dances as being suitable for viols, violins, or other musical wind instruments. But there is one work written in the 17th century for the unique combination of 7 recorders and continuo. It's by Johann Schmelzer, who worked at the court of Vienna, and I thought that it would round off this programme rather nicely.